Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and this is the first PvP data analysis of Season 2 of Midnight. We're going to be breaking down all the specializations, their current representation, and looking at some of the trends and why it is that some specializations are rising to the top and why some of them might be getting crushed and pushed towards the bottom. Blizzard has outlined a schedule that they are going to be doing class tuning basically every week for a while here, so I do expect things to be very volatile as far as representation and power specialization. So if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date on that volatility and making the right call for yourself as far as playstyle and power, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So we've got Drustvar open here, which is showing the solo shuffle stats basically for the entire globe at the moment here. You can cycle it between EU and US. When we're looking at the range DPS, the main distinction is that Frost Mage is just a lot more represented in EU than it is in NA, and maybe Devour Demon Hunter a little bit. But I kind of wanted to just mix it together. Like, what are the senses for the entire globe as far as which specializations are rising to the top, as opposed to attributing certain regional bias. But we can see there's a clear winner at the moment. It's Beast Mastery Hunter, and there's lots of reasons for it. 1, it's very powerful. 2, it's very simple. 3, it's very effective. And 4, it got Scattershot back, so it's got even some extra utility on top of just a great baseline kit. It's just really good. It just delivers. It feels like it has constant damage because Bestial Wrath is such a low cooldown. It's one of those things where it's like, it is all cooldown damage, but if Bestial Wrath is up 100% of the time, then you just do damage all of the time, and that feels really good on a specialization, and that was my reception of it at the moment as well. It's just very strong. It's just benefiting. It's a really good spec. One of the best beginner specs too, and I kind of expect it to continue to trend upward when it comes to shuffle. Affliction Warlock surprisingly taking the number 2 position. I thought for sure that this would be a mage spot. So I do think there is a bit of a contest right now between Affliction, Mage, mostly Fire and Frost, and Boomkin. I think that this is like a 3-way competition to try and determine which of these is actually the best, right? Like which is going to rise to the top. I have my own biases at the moment, but Affliction Warlock is a really solid specialization at the moment, but it is more challenging than Beast Mastery Hunter, right? To be able to be effective on it, especially surviving melee attackers at an entry level, it requires a lot more dexterity than Beast Mastery Hunter is going to. So it's almost always going to be less represented in my mind, as long as Beast Mastery Hunter is even equally as powerful, let alone if it is actually stronger. Affliction will have less representation just because it's harder to pull off, but it's a really good spec at the moment. I've been having a lot of fun with it, and it seems like Hellcaller is actually a bit more viable now as well, so you have a little bit more build diversity on this patch, maybe because it's a little more dampening in Arena, which means that Hellcaller's AoE damage becomes more effective as games prolong. Fire Mage has actually taken the number 1 mage spot over Frost, and I do think this is a very narrow race between these specializations. Getting the double barrier as Fire is a huge contributing reason. Number 2, you're not just getting one-shot by marksmanship hunters anymore, so that major downside is kind of gone. I also think that DPS shaman specs are less represented at the moment and also less powerful, so mage is kind of having a great position to be in, where the things that countered it in the meta aren't necessarily as strong, but maybe those specs will be most likely to get buffed. I sure hope they are, because I'm very sad with Ellie at the moment. But Fire Mage is really good. It's very condensed into combustion at the moment. And I think it's okay for some specs to be a little bit more cooldown oriented than others. You don't want everything to just be exactly the same, but that is a disadvantage to Frost, whereas Frost I think just does more damage overall outside of its windows, even without Ray of Frost. And I think having the 2 ice blocks is actually going to be those 2 main reasons, I think, is why Frost will actually uptrend over Fire in the long term. And then this is me trying to make a prediction as to whether Fire or Frost will end up ahead ultimately. Like if we held a BlizzCon tournament right now, I would think that most mages might go Frost. 1, because they put all the practice into it and its gameplay hasn't changed too much, but 2, because I think it will rotate through ice blocks so effectively, because it's such a low cooldown to have 2 of them, that you're just almost always going to have a defensive cooldown to survive at that high level of competitive play. But Fire is definitely in a lot better position since getting the double barrier, but I think we'll see this trend. I'm curious to see if that prediction actually plays out or not for next week's breakdown. Boomkin is fantastic. However, I do think its defense is a bit shaky relative to Mage. Well, for sure against Mage. Maybe a bit more equal towards Affliction Warlock, but its damage profile is just great. It just feels good. The damage buttons that you press just feel good. It feels good right now. I think it's going to end up being in a strong or moderate competitive position. However, at a tournament level of play, I could see it struggling on survivability terms. Marksmanship Hunter still holding in a solid position, even despite having a lot of its kind of big burst one-shot damage stripped down. I had a lot of fun with it yesterday, even just playing in full honor gear. You're already behind the gearing curve. You're starting 3 days later because you can get so much gear on day one if you play. But even in full blue gear, I was having a lot of fun on Marksman and Beast Mastery Hunter, even despite that. So Marksmanship is still a great pick. Overall, I was playing some Dark Ranger, having a blast with it. It's just a good spec. It's in a solid spot. Shadow is actually middle of the pack. It was middle of the pack last season. I think now most Shadow Priests are playing Archon instead of Void Weaver. You do a lot of damage in that window of time with the Mind Flay Insanities. However, outside of that, you don't really do a lot of damage. And unlike Fire Mage, I think that Shadow shouldn't be a spec that's focused on only doing damage during its Halo or its Void form. It should be a spec that's doing damage more consistently outside of these cooldowns. It does feel like you need a bit of dampening, but again, those specs that feel like they need dampening end up doing a bit better right now because you can actually survive to that point in dampening, but that's mostly attributed, I think, to the healer balance, which we'll get to in a moment. But I would like them to shift the damage on Shadow Priest into their baseline abilities, right? Their core abilities like Mind Flay and Mind Blast. It just feels like those spells are just like, you're supposed to press them as filler, but it seems like you're just risking getting kicked on Shadow to do nothing. Like, they just don't have any meaningful impact, and maybe that's a healer issue. Maybe you should bring the healing down first as far as tuning before adjusting up the damage, but it does feel like your filler abilities are kind of meaningless. Devour Demon Hunter, I've seen a couple of people still playing the 100 souls build, or at least the larger souls build, and spamming Devour. The Hunt build still kind of has a one-shot potential. I think it's still in a good spot. It's got high survivability against a lot of these casters towards the top side of things, and you're not really getting one-shot by at least subtlety rogues, and assassination rogue is a bit easier to predict. So it just seems like Devour Demon Hunter is in a good spot when it comes to shuffle competitiveness. It's just kind of got a rock, paper, scissors position where it counters the casters, but may struggle a bit with the assassination or potential Fire Mage burst currently available. Destruction Warlock was one that I thought was really going to be smashing it out of the park here, but it's trending towards the bottom of overall representation. Likely attributed to Warrior and Assassination Rogue, I think. These specializations can lock you down a lot. And maybe the unforeseen representation of Restoration Shaman as well. Maybe difficult for you with Grounding Totem and Wind Shear and all these low cooldown interrupts and disruptions that are available to stop you. Obviously, Soulfire got nerfed too, so maybe that shifted people's weight to week one to want to go into Affliction instead of Destruction. But I think it's still good. But maybe more so as a Battleground spec. It's very similar to Arcane in that sense. When you are able to cast, you feel really strong. When you're not able to cast, you're just like annoyed and irritated, but you do have multiple schools of magic, which is why I think that it's trending higher than Arcane Mage. Elemental Shaman just feels like a tickle cannon. They brought down the power of Ascendance, but the damage outside of Ascendance does feel like lackluster. Stormkeeper losing an extra instant lightning bolt feels really bad. It just, much like Shadow, it just feels like its core abilities need to come up, because for me, Ellie Shaman is another spec where it's like, I feel like this should be a spec that in PvP that's just doing damage all the time, as opposed to only condensed in these specific cooldown windows, which you still kind of feel like you do only do damage in Ascendance. It's just you don't do as much as you did last season. So it kind of feels like a tickle cannon. Was kind of disappointed with it. I'm really hoping that it's going to get some attention. It kind of feels like Ret Paladin did, and Ret Paladin got a lot of attention, which actually put it into a really good spot, which should show us that they are going to be capable of getting specs into a really good spot with what they did with Ret Paladin. So hopefully we can just be more vocal with the ones that need a little bit of a pick-me-up at the moment, because Ellie Shaman is definitely one of those. Devastation Evoker, trending towards the bottom side again. It's much like BM Hunter. I find this spec to be really easy, simple to pick up, and decently effective, but it's just not competing with Beastmaster Hunter, even despite that. And again, maybe it's a fantasy thing, right? People pick a spec because of its strength. People pick it because of a fantasy. And there's multiple reasons to pick a spec. I think the fantasy might be lacking on it. I do like the Iron Man change where you're flying around like a human shooting Disintegrate, but wish that it, if you're hovering, you still could look like a human as opposed to having to be a dragon when you were hovering. I think limiting the dragon ability to like empower spells as opposed to the hover could be another way to just make the class flavor having a little more distinction, right? If you don't like the dragon, you can just look like a humanoid Iron Man, or if you do like it, you can be the dragon still. But Devastation, I think maybe is lacking a little bit of top end as far as burst. Like maybe they could bring up the instant fire breath damage a bit to try and give it a bit more punch, because it's definitely lacking in that department. Arcane Mage, really fun rework. I actually think the rework is fun, but it's just non-functional in PvP because it's so much slow hard casting, and the way that the arcane missiles work now, where it spends your orb charges, means that if you fake cast that missile, you lose all your orb charges. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you fake cast and you lose all your orbs, great, you got the interrupt out of the way, but now you have no orbs. Or if you don't fake cast, you get kicked and now you can't do anything. So it's like, it needs a little bit of help there with multiple schools of magic like destruction if this play style is going to operate in my view for PvP. But it's still like decent representation. It's not 0, right? It's still decent. Unlike Og, one Og so far, and then Demonology Warlock, which right now it's just like you're a fluff tickle tank. You know, you're like a tank spec with a lot of CC. You're just spamming CC on everybody and like tickling everybody. It just feels like it has no bite basically on the specialization at the moment. That's the main issue with Demonology. And then finally, Augmentation. This thing is just a frustration machine where you're trying to keep Ebonmite up, and if you get CC'd for even a millisecond, it falls off, and you don't have the one shot that you had in season 1. So I think Augmentation will probably be even lower than it was. As far as being in alignment with my predictions here, I think I predicted Destruction maybe too high. Maybe that wasn't accounting for the Soulfire nerf that came in after the list that I made. I think I might have predicted Ellie a little bit too high, but I also put it in my top 9 worst specs because after playing it I was like, maybe this isn't too good. And ranged balance here, I'm very curious to see what ends up breaking out, because I do think something in here is going to break out. Mind you, if they make more changes, it's going to be increasingly difficult for any spec to start to have a breakout. I was expecting Mage to have a breakout more than BM Hunter, but BM Hunter is definitely conquering at the moment. Now with the melee DPS, a bit more even towards the top end between Retribution, Warrior, and Assassination. You can see all those changes made to Ret. Ret is still up there trending in a great position. And even for a Rogue spec, Assassination is right on their heels, man. This is a lot of Rogues. Usually Rogue representation is low. But even look at Unholy DK, like the fantasy on this is so strong that even though it's not that great, it's actually carrying it into the number 4 position. Because I put Unholy DK as the worst spec. I still think it is the worst spec. It does decent into casters, but into these guys, oh my god, bro, I think it's a rough ride. But even despite that, it's still in the number 4 position. So Unholy DK is just waiting for like a little bit of a buff before it's going to start to rip, I think. But these guys obviously just do insane burst damage on Assassination Rogue, good strong overall damage. Like Arms Warrior just feels good at all times. It's one of the specs where I think they nailed where they were trying to tune the specs. And then Ret feels really solid now as well in those windows. So hopefully they can just apply that methodology that they have to these specs to these other specs, because I think when it comes to range DPS and melee DPS, I think it's a buff the weak situation as opposed to a nerf the strong, although maybe Assassination a little bit on their burst damage. Havoc, it's in a good spot, but it feels like it only does damage during your Eldraki Reaver window, and then if you don't have that, you're doing nothing. It's much like Shadow Priest, right? If you're only doing damage during your Archon, your Halo, and your Void Form, and then not really doing much, and it's a very complicated way to actually set up the Eldraki Reaver. You have to get a proc, and then you got to toss it, and then you got to Chaos Strike before Blade Dancing, but make sure you're in meta, and then that Blade Dance does a significant amount of someone's health. It's like a very complicated procedure to actually move someone's health as opposed to just attacking in your button to move someone's health. I think it makes it less understandable for new players or just the average player, and it can be frustrating even at the top level, because if somebody understands your spec, they're going to shut you down in those windows and you're going to feel useless outside of it. So that's my main grievance right now. Whereas with Unholy DK, it doesn't do cooldown damage because it doesn't really do damage in general. Every lobby I've seen, it was like bottom damage, but it does do really well into casters. And then obviously with these guys, you know, maybe that's why Unholy DK representation is still in a healthy margin. Windwalker just got off really good in this patch, just a lot tankier, still has great damage. Enhancement Shaman, it's got good healing, good overall damage, still kind of does damage in the Doomwind's Ascendance window, but it's just not as spiky as it was. It's kind of similar to Ellie, where it's like its cooldown's got weaker, but its damage outside is still about the same. The 5% damage buff was nice, though. Like those types of tweaks that they did last week moving into this week, I think doing like a little bit more of those on some specs will be great. Fury Warrior, I rated this as one of the worst specs, but I actually think it's low-key sleeper good. And I don't know maybe if the tier list talk has actually dragged this number down or not, or if it's one of those things where people just prefer to play arms when it comes to PvP if they're even remotely equal. But from the Fury Warriors that I've seen, Fury Warrior actually is rocking right now. So I think Fury Warrior will likely keep going up as time moves on. Survival Hunter, I've seen a lot of people who are survival mains who just don't like the current design, the current playstyle, and and obviously the effectiveness of BM is just so high. Marksman has been so high competitively season to season that really the only reason to play this would be Mending Bandage against these rogues and Tracker's Net. And then aside from those two abilities, I think it's just generally better to be BM or Marks, unfortunately. And that's just kind of where it's lying at the moment. Feral Druid, I think, is solid, but it's very complicated. So it has to be like significantly better than a lot of these easier to play specs, or its representation is just going to be lower. But I do think it's decent, even despite being, you know, less represented here. Subtlety Rogue, I think, was expected with how good Assassination is, that everybody was going to jump into that bucket, but also it was the most negatively impacted by the 20-second DR change, I think, of any spec in the game. And its damage got brought down a bit within its cooldown window. So it's not surprising to see it here. You could, I'm sure that the best subtlety rogues are still going to be able to pull it off, but it's like, why would you? And Assassination is just so good. However, Assassination is probably one of the specs I would think that's locked in, unless they're just like, it's a poison patch with ula'tek. We're going to let this be really strong. I guess we'll have to see. Frosty K I was expecting to be where Unholy was, and Unholy to be where Frost is. Now, Frost still has survivability issues, but its cooldown damage is actually still decent. So I was expecting that to carry it a lot more here. But maybe it's struggling more than I anticipated with the melee up here, that they're probably just slumping you and throwing you around like a ragdoll. But I was actually the inverse of here as far as my expectations for representation for Unholy and Frost. And then Outlaw Rogue. It's just the most complicated spec in the game. Tough to get effectiveness out of it, especially at the entry level or moderate level. Obviously, again, if you're rank 1 level, top level rogue, maybe it's Sleeper still the best spec in the game, but very few people are in that camp, so it's just not going to have a high amount of representation, especially considering where Assassination is currently sitting. And the survivability issues with Assassination don't appear to be an issue as much this season, because obviously it's slower, so you're not just like falling over, whereas Outlaw has a bit better survivability. So it was kind of carrying it in those kind of more burst oriented meta situations. And then healer balance, which I think is the most egregiously out of whack, which we can see on the chart. Holy Priest throughput is just very high. I think that they're going to have to bring down the throughput on paramending their mastery, but I think they need to bring their damage up at the same time. I feel like pressing Smite and even Holy Fire at times just feels pointless. The damage output just is non-existent, and unfortunately Holy Priest is one of those specs where it doesn't really offer a lot other than the stun, fear, and aura mastery. So if its throughput gets gutted too much, then it's just like straight back to the bottom. But it definitely, I think Holy Priest is like completely throwing out of whack the current pacing of the game, and it actually is tough to tell if like, is damage actually too low, or is it just Holy Priest healing is too high? Because like it seems incredibly out of whack. It got a mana buff also moving into this week, which is, so now it's just the best mana too. But I think this one will likely be the one that gets targeted. Holy Paladin, number 2 position, maybe because it's the best class to deal with Rogue. Just Paladin in general might be why representation is also as high as it is. Just really good in that regard. Very strong cooldowns to trade with that. Although it's a cooldown based healer, so you would expect, in a meta that's a little slower, more dampening, that maybe the cooldown based healer would be doing not as good. But its damage is still in a solid spot, even despite getting nerfed. It's just a good healer at the moment. Restoration Shaman doing a lot better than I anticipated. I was expecting it to be a bit lower here, but seems like the rest of the Shamans are making it happen. They did buff Farseer, but I think most people are still playing Totemic at the top level. But it seems like you can pull it off. You can make it work. It might be a bit more of a struggle in Shuffle. Definitely Holy Priest is outshining, I think, significantly every other healer. But then when we compare the other healers, I think it's a lot closer, which you can kind of tell with the way that the chart is working at the moment. So just like a big tweak here on Holy Priest. I definitely think will be inevitable with the changes that happen either, I think, today or tomorrow. And then Discipline Priest, I'm surprised it's not at the bottom. You guys really like your Disc Priest, because in my view, Disc Priest is actually the weakest healer. But you guys are holding it up still in the middle of the pack here, and that's where fantasy and playstyle can carry a spec as opposed to just strength alone, right? Like this healer is the only one that has that atonement damage playstyle, and even if it ends up being significantly weaker, people are still opting for that just because it's so dang fun, which is carrying here. But maybe it gets a little buff. We gotta hope though. Resto Druid I expected to be higher than this too. I thought Resto Druid would be up here. So healer balance is definitely outside of Holy Priest. I think there's a lot of movement here of people trying to figure out what is actually the meta. But mind you, Druid did get nerfed pretty significantly moving from last week into this week, so maybe that's attributing to it as well. And then Mistweaver seems to be losing a lot of steam, starting to fall to the bottom of the pack, although I think it's the best healer into Hunter, and Beastmaster and Hunter is the number 1 represented range there, and Marks is pretty high as well, with the ability to port while stunned to avoid trap. I think is a main component for its success, but I haven't played a lot of it. I think its main issue from seeing it is that its mana is its issue. It's kind of just like, I've seen a lot of times you just and the Holy Priest is like 80% mana in your So for some reason its mana seems to be off, has been my observation, but I still need more data on this one, obviously, given that we've only had a couple days in the season. But I think that's one of the main reasons why its is falling behind a bit. Preservation Evoker, actually the least represented healer. It's still actually the best flag carrier in Battleground Blitz, although maybe a little bit more in line, but it's still very slippery, has a lot of mobility there. Definitely, I think it's one of the best Battleground healers, but in Shuffle, you'd expect it actually to do decently here too, because its main weaknesses were Subtlety Rogue, and that seems to be all but gone. And it has the ability to Cauterizing Flames onto the Assassination Rogue Bleeds, which is such a high representation. You would have thought the Prez would actually be doing pretty good here. I do wonder if it's a mana issue with this one as well, if games are just going long long and it's struggling to keep mana up through the throughput that's available to Holy Priest, if that's an issue for it. So again, these are things where like maybe these guys get better if once this guy gets brought down, but like this guy's got to get dealt with. This guy is definitely making it impossible to like exact discernment on what is going on in the game. Holy Priest is just too good to be able to really hone in on what else needs to change. So I do expect this one to be the most heavy-handed of them. And then once it is, I think healer balance is actually going to get into a much better position, which is very important for the beginning of the season, because otherwise, if you have a situation like this and it lasts too long, it's going to be very bad. Because a lot of these other healers are gonna give up and they're gonna quit. So I do hope that this is the first major thing that needs to be addressed. And then obviously I hope they look at these and try and bring up some of the ones that are towards the bottom end of the representation and the strength curve. But aside from that, thank you guys very much for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown, and I will see you in the next one.